might need a bigger boat here. Well, first off, thank you, Dr. Lang, for that very kind and gracious introduction, and your reference to the spirit of St. Benedict. You know, I wish we had so much more of that in our public discourse today. That is, anyway. I'd also like to thank Joseph Boyd, the president of Benedictine University, and Marco Massini, the dean of students, both of whom were instrumental in organizing today's event. You know, it was great actually to meet the students in the Scholars Program just a few minutes ago backstage. And also, you know, the Lyle Police and the Benedictine security personnel who are always key to just making sure that events like this run smoothly. But most important, thank all of you for being here. You know, I understand how scary these times are for so many of you. I think probably like many of you, you're not sleeping too well in the last couple months. And it's just, and especially those of you who rely on the very federal programs that the Trump administration is threatening. And that's why I have and will continue to host town halls like these, both in person and over the phone, to ensure that you all know what I'm doing in Washington on your behalf. Trump and Elon Musk's Doge.
Thank you.
Trump and Elon Musk's Doge they're targeting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other essential programs. And why are they doing this?
Congressman Foster, when will you target the Israeli lobby?
Okay.
Last night, what keeps me up at night is the child that I saw, dead babies in Gaza. You're a scientist. You support fracking. You support the ecocide and genocide.
Down.
Will you stop sending weapons to Israel?
Excuse me? Everybody is here to listen to the congressman. Can you please speak to us afterwards? We're happy to talk with you and have a meeting with you. Thank you for please allowing this event to continue. Please be seated or we'll have to escort you out. Please be seated or we'll have to escort you out. We'd like this event to continue.
Well, I would like for Congressman Foster to answer.
He will answer questions.
You run as a
Please,
scientist.
we would ask nobody else to engage. We would just handle the situation.
Bye-bye.
We ask that nobody else engage. We will, if you'd like to sit down and listen to the event, we'd be happy to answer your questions, or if you'd like to
Israel
leave.
bombs, USA pays. How many kids were killed today?
Please,
Israel
sir.
bombs, USA pays. How many kids were killed? Israel bombs, USA pays. How many kids were killed today? Israel bombs, USA pays. How many kids were killed today?
This is one of the reasons Trump has succeeded.
Thank you. We'll continue now.
I agree with it.
And if anybody else who has an issue relating to this topic, we are happy to meet with you, and we always have. So thank you so much for being here today.
I will apologize. There is a card I believe that we'll be getting to. I look quickly at the first set of submissions there, and you know there are important issues there. I hope we get time to talk about here. You know, but the point I was getting to is why are they doing this? Why are there these programs that millions of Americans depend on, and are supported widely by Democrats and Republicans alike? Things like Medicaid, which has very strong bipartisan support. And why is it that they're going after these programs? When you look at it, the only answer that makes any sense is that they really are doing this to pay for the tax cuts for their billionaire buddies. And that's pretty much it. And the House Republicans who claim to be worried about debt and so on, have signaled their support by passing a budget that calls for $2 trillion in cuts to these vital federal programs, including Medicaid. And including many Republicans who, frankly ran on a program of never cutting Medicaid or Medicare or these other important programs. We're also fighting Trump in the courts, where judges have largely blocked his illegal actions. It's frustrating because it takes a while to work through the court system. But we've been having good news. There are over 100 suits that have been filed challenging all the actions he's taking. We have not yet lost one of them on merits. A couple of them, they've said, find someone else who has standing to sue, and we're finding someone else. But we have not lost one of those. Now they're going to end up in Trump's Supreme Court. And, it's uncertain where they'll end up. But, we have a bunch of really good lawyers that are doing, and I'll be talking more about that.
What about people's First Amendment rights?
That's on our list of things to defend.
You've
I
done
assure
no,
that-
you've
I
made
assure
no
that you in
statements at
Congress-
all about the people who are actually fighting for their rights and trying to use their rights and their
please-
First Amendment rights. No, I don't, because you know what? We've been emailing your office for many months, and you don't care about meeting with any of your constituents. So why they always say what you want to hear? And what you want to hear is that it's okay to take APAC money. It is okay to continue bombing people. It is okay to give billions of dollars to Israel when people here need it. You want to blame Trump? You want to blame Doge? You're the one that helped him do that. You're the one that helped him do that. And this weak-ass Democratic Party does nothing for them. All you do is help them do that. And you know you do. You let them take billions of dollars just recently to Israel.
Americans first already.
Give them that. Did you buy First Amendment right? What are you going to do? Deport me? I'm a U.S. citizen. And I can do what the hell I want to say. You guys don't give a fuck about nobody. You don't care about the dead people. 400 killed yesterday.
Listen to me. Listen to me.
Absolutely nothing. But fuck up this system.
You never listen.
I haven't seen what I answers already.
I can deal with what I want.
You may leave as well.
And you know
I can leave whatever I
You've been
want.
messaging your office and you never want to hear anybody. You just leave, great. Hopefully someone cares about you when your kids and everybody else's federal programs are getting cut, right? Then you want to care about it. But when billions of dollars are being sent to Israel so that they can
I thank
continue to
everybody for your
bomb people's
patience.
families, you
I
don't
thank
care.
everybody for your patience.
That answers that.
Thank you for your patience.
I'm
Congressman, you want me to start taking the
Yeah,
questions? Or did
we'll
other
do your
questions?
question. Yeah, I look at it, I think, I'll go to the questions here. Yeah, go ahead, let's go to the questions. So I was basically done. I don't know if you've ever seen those old Norman Rockwell pictures of town halls. It's actually, it's an American tradition. So let's try to get systematic here and answer as many as we can.
Well, again, we received a lot of questions. We tried to condense it down to particular topics. The first that we heard a lot is, what are you doing to stop President Trump from dismantling our federal government?
Oh, okay, well, that's it. First off, obviously, I'm a member of the legislative branch. We have a lot of power, and there's powers that's reserved to other branches. Fundamentally, Congress has the power of the purse. We specify the programs that we will fund and the programs we won't fund, and we give specific instructions for what's to be done with those different pots of money. There have been violations, in my opinion, of the instructions we gave them. And this is an old fight. Back when I was, Richard Nixon had a big fight over impoundment, what he called impoundment. It was impoundment back then. And where he just refused to spend money that Congress allocated. And it was a big fight, and people realized that the Constitution wasn't absolutely clear on that. When Congress appropriates money and the executive branch says, maybe not. And so what we did after that, what Congress did after that, is they set up a specific set of legislation that says the conditions under which the executive can refuse to spend money that Congress allocates, because there are times when that is legitimately necessary. If the conditions change so it's simply impossible to do a program, you obviously can't spend the money. And so there are conditions on that that are well prescribed. They give you a few months, it varies from situation to situation, but typically a few months where the president can refuse to spend money pretty much on any program and then they've got to go back to Congress. And that's something, a system that was set up, assuming that we would have someone of good faith always as president. So, and that's a problem. It occurs again and again. We have seen, we've seen so many instances where our system assumes that you'll have a competent and caring president with maybe somewhat different priorities, not someone who just wants to destroy everything. And so those are cases where you go to the third branch of government, the courts. And as I say, we're doing okay so far in those fights. They haven't gone all the way through the courts, but that's, now in Congress we have limited ability. We, for example, in almost all situations cannot initiate a lawsuit. It's sort of strange, I'm not a lawyer and I don't understand, but that's apparently well-established precedent that Congress, when we allocate money and it doesn't get spent, that we have to, that we can't just file a suit in court. We depend on third parties, and there have been no shortage of really competent third parties that have initiated over 100 suits and so far have not lost a single one on the merit. All right, and that's encouraging, but it's not the end of the line. And so, yeah, the enforcement, yeah, sure. That's a question. We've seen the edge of. Look, there's a long history here too. My dad wrote a lot of the enforcement language behind the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And for those of you who know the history of this, it was the Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, back in 1954, where the Supreme Court said very clearly you cannot have separate school systems for the separate races. And for a decade, Southern school districts and Southern federal judges sort of thumbed their nose at the Supreme Court. And so it has been a slowly hard-won victory that we have an understanding that when the Supreme Court says something, we follow it, period, full stop. And that's going to be tested, I'm afraid, in the coming weeks and years. And I have a lot of hope that Republicans who currently are fully supportive of all of this will draw the line at defying the Supreme Court. Who knows?
Who will do that?
If you look at, have a look at what Chief Justice Roberts said today. This was something where Trump had said, just impeach. Right? Okay, that is a very good start because Chief Justices seldom speak out in response to just a comment that's made on social media. Okay, but that tells you that he has a red line. I disagree with Chief Justice Roberts on a lot of things, but he seems to have integrity and a real care for the democracy of the United States. So let's see. Anyway, so it's a coming fight. Is the wrong answer to that?
Let's get to the next question.
Okay.
Okay. What is your stance on Trump's trade policy, specifically all of the tariffs?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the frustrating things about this as a scientist and a businessman is that, I see the damage of these tariffs. And, when the tariffs came up last time, I was besieged by businesses saying, what the hell, we are being clobbered by the effects of these tariffs. It's sort of, those of you who've suffered through, macroeconomics have probably learned just how bad tariffs were back in the Depression. You've seen the recent numbers. When people say, why is U.S. growth significantly higher than, say, Europe and other advanced countries, a big part of that is we have low tariffs and they have high tariffs. Because if you're trying to manufacture something in the United States, I'm a manufacturer. When I was 19, my little brother and I started this company that now produces about 2/3 of all the theater lighting equipment, including maybe the lighting. But and we do hardware, software, sheet metal, painting, wiring harnesses, everything we manufacture in the Midwest. I'm very proud of it. But there are parts that we import. Okay, and when you see those huge tariffs being put on imported parts, guess what? When you try to re-export that material, it's not competitive. All right, and it's because the United States has had pretty low tariffs that we have had the highest growth rate in the advanced economies of the world, and that's pretty important, and it agrees with theory. It also agrees with the evidence. there's a big effort to rewrite history on the part of the Trump administration. But last time around, Trump's tariffs put us into a manufacturing recession 1 full year before COVID. Okay? That was causing pain. There was an export recession 1 year before COVID. There was a drop in manufacturing employment 1 year before COVID. This hurt last time he did it, and he's doing it with a vengeance this time. And so I'm now once again being besieged by businesses in my district. There's one that does sheet metal forming in Aurora, and the guy calls up, you won't believe this, the price of hot rolled steel is up 33% just since the inauguration, just in anticipation of those tariffs. And that's going to make the products, and export some of what he makes. It's just going to make it uncompetitive. And this is a tough thing to explain to people, because everyone's sort of frustrated that wouldn't it be great if we made absolutely everything in the United States? But there's a reason to buy a lot of our steel and a lot of our lumber from Canada, because they have a lot of the resources necessary to do that, and they can do it at a price lower than we can. And there are things we can do cheaper than Canada, and it makes sense for us to trade and not have tariffs on that. And when you see the sort of nonsense economics that somehow Donald Trump has convinced himself of, and then you see these really smart businessmen that he brings into his orbit who know better, just standing up and saying things they don't believe in support of tariffs and stuff like this.
Why?
I do not know. I do not know. This is it's something I wonder a lot about. Everything about the Trump, the Trump orbit. There's a member, a very wise member, Marcy Kaptur, who represents Toledo, who pointed out something interesting though, which is that every member of the Trump's orbit was neglected as a child. Which is not, it sounds funny, but you go down this list. J.D. Vance wrote a book about how his childhood was terrible. It's really interesting. You go down this list, and so they seem to be almost united by a grievance against the universe because you made fun of in 4th grade or whatever it is. I don't know, but maybe it's a clue, because this why is a hard thing. I am always bothered when I see smart people doing evil stuff. It just really bothers me, but it's a fact of life. We've seen it many times in history. When you figure that out, let me know. Okay.
All right. We've got a good one here. We've marched and rallied for democracy. What have you been doing?
You've been giving money to Israel. That's what you've been doing.
Right after this all started, one of the worst things that happened right after.
Keep going.
Right after.
Just keep going.
Congressman, you can continue.
Okay, all right. I'll just try to continue here. I hope that people are able to hear me. The first thing I did, I'm just trying to remember that you're talking probably about protests and things like that. Outside the Treasury, when Elon Musk gave access to all of our private information of the Treasury payment system, then that is
willing to condemn what happened to our ally who was taken with his First Amendment right.
Sir, we will get to that question. If you could please just wait a moment.
Yeah, we're going to get to a lot of these questions.
Thank you.
If we have some order here.
Well, Israel just started bombing children again. They just broke the ceasefire. This is an immediate question. This is one that can't wait.
Congressman, if you'd like to answer this question.
Yeah, okay. So let's say I'll just try to go through that. So there was a rally outside the Treasury that said, get Elon Musk's cotton picking hands off of the Treasury payment system. I am the lead Democrat on the subcommittee with oversight over all banking, and when you mess with the Treasury payment system, that is a mortal threat to our financial system. And that was a big deal to me immediately. And later on, when the Department of Education was threatened, I was one of a big group of members of Congress who showed up at the door demanding a meeting with the acting head of the person they put in charge to say, okay, are you really going to shut this down? Really? And they wouldn't meet with us, and there was an interesting large group of people there. More recently, I was honored to speak at the Stand Up for Science rally on the Lincoln Memorial, in front of the Lincoln Memorial. What was significant there is that you saw Democrats and Republicans. You saw Fred Upton, who was in charge of the most relevant committee, a Republican, retired. They're speaking passionately in support of science, and it's obviously a big deal with me, because the long-term damage that's done when you defund science in this country, it's something I've been fighting for a long time. So I do a certain amount of that. And also a certain amount of just trying to talk quiet sense to my Republican colleagues, and try to identify those that have a core of decency. And then you see that from time to time. Sometimes it shows up by, okay, I've had it with today's Republican Party, I'm out of here. You saw it with Mitt Romney or Adam Kinzinger, when they just say, okay, that's it, I'm done. It also shows up from time to time when they're willing to stand up. Senator Tillis, actually gave a very, very impassioned speech on behalf of the Ukrainians. On the floor of the Senate, he had pictures of slaughtered Ukrainians that were slaughtered by Russian troops, and said, "What the heck are we doing here?" And and from time to time, you'll see this bubble up to the surface, and he was taking a risk doing that. All right, and my hope is that as this goes on, more and more Republicans will be thinking about that. I'm trying to do with some of my time, just privately talk with them. One of the things I'm working on with other members of the Financial Services Committee, Republicans, is that there is $300 billion of frozen Russian assets, most of it in Belgium, but other places in Europe, some in the United States, and that money should be turned over, taken away from Russia and given to Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine. There's motion along that. It was not moving fast, but when Donald Trump decided he was going to vote against Ukraine in the United Nations, and with all the bad countries you can name, that put a shock into the soul of the civilized world.
So you care about the
And that was-
Ukrainian children.
And there she goes.
And
Please go. Please go.
You care about
All right, should we do the next?
Okay, so I would like to move on to the next question. We are happy to meet with you, and we will address that issue later. I'm happy to talk to you about that later, but our next question is, I am a constituent, a supporter from Lamont. I'm employed by the CFPB. The court has stopped us from being eliminated, but that is clearly what the administration wants to do. Can't Congress do something to stop them from destroying government, including the CFPB?
All this money, all this weapons to Israel, to indiscriminately bomb my people. I have family in Bethlehem. He's the one doing it. To go to other countries. They become refugees.
The CFPB, I should actually probably for the audience here explain what the CFPB is. It stands for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It's one of my proudest votes in Congress was for the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. And the consumer protection part of that was in large part, to form the CFPB. And what this is you're all familiar with the FDA. So when you eat food, there is an agency that makes sure that this food is safe and that there are no poisons in it. And there had not been any agency who's responsible for making sure that we don't have toxic financial products that were so much at the heart of the financial collapse 15 years ago now. That people were given mortgages which everyone knew they could never repay them. And this sort of thing should not ever be allowed to happen again. And then that's what the CFPB was put in place to prevent. They were given credit cards with just unbelievably rip-off terms of the credit cards. And that was at least partly fixed by the CFPB. And the enforcement power when bad actors appear was put in the hands of the CFPB. And so then the question, I think, was how are you going to prevent Trump from destroying that? And so the issue on that is that, again, we made a mistake in assuming that there would be people with good faith running the operation from here on forward. And so when we said the CFPB director could specify the budget that they needed, the funds are drawn from the Federal Reserve Bank, and in the amount determined by the CFPB director. And so when Trump appoints a CFPB director that says, okay, fine, $0, we didn't protect ourselves against that. And so that there's so many places where we have just made an assumption of good faith that is not being followed through. And what? Well, there is a long list of things that we have to repair when we get the majority back. That's right. Well, it's the acting in good faith. You know, I go through a long list. Another example. So there are many examples of acting in bad faith and ways that we can fix it. You know, one simple example, you know, everyone's familiar with that ever since Richard Nixon, every presidential candidate had published 10 years of tax returns. Just, it was one of the things you did. Again, we said, do we need a law? No one will ever run for president without publishing their tax returns. Okay? So now we need a law that says the moment you declare for presidency, the IRS publishes 10 years of your returns. And that's it. And that law would have probably prevented something else. And so every member of Congress has a list of things that we have to fix when we get back the majority. All right. And that's it's on our list. Yeah. So,
okay. Our next question. How can...
Are you seriously going to wait until we get back the majority to fight back against Trump and fight back against the Republicans? Because people are dying right now. Our marginalized communities are on.
Ma'am, we are answering your questions. Please do not disrupt the event. Okay, please ask the man.
I have met with them. I met with them in December 2023.
If you can please...
And I shared my personal
Ma'am,
story.
we're going to continue with the event. I'm happy to meet again. If you could please
all
leave.
the Palestinians in Gaza who we love, who have been murdered by Israel. And since December 2023, U.S. weapons and U.S. funding, U.S. weapons and U.S. funding, I'm going. Israel.
Thank you all for your patience.
Has wiped out. I'm going. Israel has murdered tens of thousands.
To the issue of research side by protecting your guns, science research, or we move on to
all that funding is going to healthcare. It can be to our communities, to our communities. Shame on you, you're a coward! Fight back against Trump, you know what you want to do, you know what Israel wants to do. You told us that! Yeah, Netanyahu, everyone does. And that's what Trump is going to do. That's not going to do.
Congressman, before we go on with the next question, we do have a question in the stack that we are going to get to related to the escalation of the Israeli-Gaza war. What is your position on that?
Yeah, so, I mean, one of the...
Thank you for your patience. We'll get back to the event.
So we do, so we've been brought up to the top of the cards there. A question on Israel, because it's a real issue and one that I'll just say a few things about that. One of them is that one of the tragedies of the situation is those who care were unfortunately very effective in helping Donald Trump get elected. It actually went backwards. That the people who vote. And so this is something where, you know, I should say that, I'll start out by saying something about Bibi Netanyahu, Israel's leader. You know, I've met him several times. The first time I ever met him, he lied to my face. Okay? Yes. Okay, yeah, okay, I'll try it. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I was just talking about Bibi Netanyahu, who is a gentleman, I guess, who has, to my mind, systematically destroyed everything that I admire about Israel. And it just... first one I met him, he lied to my face. And it hasn't gotten any better since then. His appearances before Congress were a disgrace to both of our democracies. And it's a horrible situation. The what happened on October 7th was intolerable in a civilized society. But there has to be a proportionality in the response to that has not been there. I let the Biden administration know privately and publicly that they should be pushing much harder for a ceasefire, using the leverage that he had to do something about there, and to talk honestly about a future for the Palestinian state, which has not ever been evident, certainly not in the Trump administration, but not as strongly in evidence in what the Biden administration was willing to actually burn political capital on. Anyway, we could have talked a whole lot on this. It's not easy. If you'd say, what is the group that most strongly represents my views on this very complex thing? There's a group called J Street, which you may know, which is a group that is, it's a group of pro-peace, pro-Israel Jewish people in the United States. And those are the ones who are fighting for what I have always admired in Israel, and trying to keep the beauty that down so the world can reckon a place. Anyway.
Thank you, Congressman. Okay, let's get to a question about Social Security. President promises not to touch Social Security, yet the acting commissioner, Leland Dudak, reportedly plans drastic cuts, closure of offices, reducing staff, and eliminating the option of applying for benefits by phone. What is Congress doing to prevent these draconian changes?
Yeah, the answer is not enough with the majority that's in control right now. It is just, that it is a fact that the great majority of Republicans in Congress ran their campaigns with a promise to not cut Social Security and to not cut Medicare, and many of them to not even cut Medicaid. All right? When they violate that, you cannot let them go from that promise. Now, many of you are probably familiar with Lauren Underwood.
Yeah.
She's a wonderful. The reason she was a member of Congress is she got lied to by her member of Congress. The gentleman representing her in Congress promised her at a town hall that he would never vote for something that took away coverage for pre-existing condition, and he lied. He did that. And that was it. That was, Lauren Underwood said, that's it. I am running against this clown. And she beat him. Yep. And then surprise this is what happens, should happen, when a member of Congress from either party just stands up and says something they know is not true. This is something, I'm a scientist, and I have a very hard line about people that deliberately lie. Because if you're a scientist and you stand up and say something you know is not true, it's a career-ending thing. You will lose your tenure. No one will ever publish anything. It is just not an acceptable thing. I think that scientists take a hard line about that because we are always operating right on the edge of what is known. The statistical significance of our data sets is marginal. There's lots of uncertainty in what we're doing, but we cannot tolerate the additional uncertainty as to whether someone presenting their data is just flat out lying. And so we don't tolerate it. And that's one of the things that, makes me sleep not so well at night when I see politicians getting away with flat out lies. And so it's one of the things.
Thank you, why don't we have a running cost countdown of the days and cost of Trump's weekend golf trips?
Okay, all right. It's a little tough because I'm sure being president is not easy. There's a thing. Okay, all right. There is a certain, like Camp David. If you remember when Jimmy Carter got elected president, he said Camp David is a waste of taxpayer money, blah blah blah. And then he realized what a rough job it was, and he said, okay, we'll let Camp David still exist. Okay? That's very different than, the stuff you see where Donald Trump goes and gets a huge Secret Service entourage and flies over an Air Force One to do laps in the Daytona 500. That's basically a campaign event. And there is no reason that sort of money wasting should happen on the taxpayer dime. And So I don't know how you write a law that draws that line cleanly, but that one is way past my line. And so that sort of thing it's really appropriate citizen engagement to make a website that actually tries to keep track of it, and a lot more transparency of what the true cost of everything that is done by the executive branch is doing.
Thank you. The next question is, I'm very concerned about the LGBTQI and trans community and their safety and health. What are you doing to support that community?
The first thing is everything I possibly can to just let them know that they're not alone. Because right now, it's a terrible feeling to see the leader of your government doing things to deliberately target you. And you see that most directly in everything he's done with the military. But just everything, the medical care that he's trying to deny people who are not, straight binary. It is one of the other proudest things I ever did as a member of Congress is, almost a decade ago now, I had the first ever roundtable on what it's like to be LGBTQ in the suburbs. Because mostly, historically, anyone who is non-binary would have to go to downtown Chicago to be their true selves. But there were people I knew well who were just sitting there suffering in silence out in the suburbs. And so we had a round table on what that was like, and we thought maybe we'd get a few people. And all of the other members of Congress at the time just said, Bill, you're crazy, the suburbs are not ready for this. And so we had an overflow crowd, and they stayed around talking for a long time. And that's where the idea came about to have the Aurora Pride Parade, the first ever Pride Parade in the suburbs. And that was the biggest. So part of it is what we can do legally, and part of it is what we can do, just to show support. One of the things, I mentioned my company does theater lights. One of the things I'm most proud of, you remember when the Obergefell decision came down legalizing gay marriage, all right? That, and they lit up Obama lit up the White House with pride colors. That was my company's lights.
Thank you, Congressman. Can you please continue to keep that mic close so everybody can hear you?
Good staff work. Okay.
Thank you so much. Is there any way at this point to prevent the Republicans from unilaterally raising or eliminating the debt ceiling?
Legally, no, because the debt ceiling is an act of Congress, and if they have a majority vote to do that, they can. So that is the leverage we have. I think, however, there are probably 20 Republicans who have campaigned on the fact that they never ever voted to raise the debt ceiling. Okay, and this is why in this negotiation, there are two real leverage points in negotiations we have coming up. One of them is the debt ceiling, where the Republicans, have this group of members who are just, the super Freedom Caucus, zero government types who will never ever vote, they say, to raise the debt ceiling, and presumably they would never ever vote to eliminate it entirely. So that is one break on the whole behavior. On the other hand, we're one of the only two countries in the world that have the debt ceiling. The other one, I think maybe Finland or something like this. It's not a major country, and it's not a good thing for policy. The way most countries do their budgeting is you control your spending when you make your budget, and then you follow your budget. It's not like it's sort of like trying to control credit card spending by refusing to pay your credit card bill. That doesn't make sense, and it doesn't work well in countries when we tried it, and it hasn't been effective at limiting our debt. So it's actually. So if I could snap my fingers in a non-Trump world and to make it disappear, I would make it disappear. Because frankly, just from a Democratic point of view, it's been more of a break on Democrats than on Republicans over time. And it provides a sort of specious set of arguments and talking points about, oh no, our debt's out of control, without ever talking about the tax side of the issue. And that's one of the things that, the tax, I think I thought you said there was going to be a question on the debt. Is that one? I don't know, maybe I'm mistaken, but yeah, I get it all the time. So I will make up, this is a question from you. Because, you see this all the time. Oh, no, we have a $36 trillion debt, we blah, 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 we're about to go bankrupt. But the thing is that when people talk about the $36 trillion federal debt, they say, well, what is the wealth of America to compare that against? And does anyone know the net worth of the United States? No. It's $160 trillion. All right, so if you have $160 trillion and a debt of $36 trillion, you are not bankrupt or anywhere close to it. And the truth of the matter is that, 1/3 of that money, 1/3 of that $160 trillion is held by the top 1%. Okay, and and the bottom 50% has zero net worth. Okay, and this is often, when you strip down what we're arguing about in Congress, it's whether we're going to fix that problem or not. And when we talk about whether we're adjusting, Obamacare subsidies or something like that, part of it's, are we going to try to do something about the 50% of the United States that has no net worth? Do they deserve some decent form of health care too or not? And frankly, whether we make the top 1% and above pay their fair share.
Yes.
I see a lot of young people, and one of the things we hear all the time is the student debt problem. And I think that I will now break your heart and tell you that when I went to college, I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and it cost me $2,500 a year, including dorms. Now, I got to say, they weren't great dorms. They were sort of there was basically Army cots and cinder block dorms, but it got a hell of a good education. And we paid for that at the time by top marginal tax rates on the very rich, above 90%. Yep. And that was the time when the U.S.'s economy became the envy of the world. That's when we took over economic leadership. And we did that, so that's sort of a proof that asking the wealthy to pay their fair share makes the economy work better now. Remember that number, $160 trillion, when you hear people screaming about the $36 trillion.
Congressman, to switch gears, we had a question about the Department of Education and funding hubs for students with disabilities. How will you respond to that?
Yeah, one of the most distasteful things about what the Trump administration is doing is the glee with which they do it. Yeah. They pick on someone vulnerable, they pick on someone, and they wave around chainsaws, right? And actually, it's another example of a Republican behaving decently. It was, I think, the senator from Utah who took over Mitt Romney's seat. Okay, maybe there's something about that seat that makes you a decent human being. But he said, what are you doing firing people in the most cruel manner possible?
Yeah.
And that when you're a Republican and say that, you're actually getting out there. And they're not yet voting to reverse those, but that's a start. And that is what we have to, one of the things we have to do is try to encourage to one by one, on issue by issue, one senator because of the outrage over Ukraine, another senator over the gleeful firing of people who are just trying to do a good job for the taxpayers of the United States. There is waste in government, and we fight that every single year. Any bureaucracy will naturally grow unless you sort of lean in on it, and we have a process for that. It's the budget process. We go through, we ask, internally in each agency, and then, they come up with a proposal for next year. Their bosses look it over and say, okay, this should be increased, that should be decreased. My wife was actually very deep in this process in the Department of Energy. She was second in command of the energy, the science division of the energy department when she quit to work on my campaign. But she had been working on the budget for years, watching this work, and it's a pretty decent system. And when you find that there's a section of government that's bigger than you actually need, you don't just sit there and fire the last 30 people you hired. You say, okay, we're going to downsize this, come up with a plan to gracefully change the headcount, offer the people whose jobs will be disappearing jobs in other places in the government. And that's the way businesses work, decent businesses work, and that's the way our government should work.
Specifically to education, sir?
Yeah, well, education is one of the things that is one of the stupidest things you can cut. You know, because one of the tough things about democracy is that there's always an incentive to do things that look good in the short term and hurt you in the long term. And that's why we underinvest in things like education or neonatal care. You know, huge return on investment that we give up by not, or scientific research, long-term scientific research. And so the problem is that if you can run for office next for re-election, saying, see, I cut the budget, I'm such a hero, okay, and not acknowledge the long-term damage that did. And that's, you know, that's really what part of the education fight is about, and why I'm always on that side.
Education is the future.
Always.
Thank you. We were speaking about some Republican colleagues. Have you seen any Republican colleagues who are outwardly supporting Trump but have indicated that they want to work with you to resist him?
That's a good question.
Well, there's two parts to that question. You know, it turns out, I don't know if you know this, but I'm sort of an old white guy, and so you know, every time we go to and from votes, we all get crowded in an elevator, and often I find myself, you know, surrounded by a group of other old white guys who self-identify as Republicans, and so they start talking among themselves, not realizing, you know, that there's a spy aboard. And often, you know, there's uncomfortable jokes made about how horrible Trump is. So among themselves, they understand how far off of normal he has pulled their party. And then when I have individual conversations, you know, often I have a piece of legislation I'm trying to find a partner for, and I have my staff look around and say, you know, he's a doctor, maybe he'll get on board with something pro-science or something like that. And so I talk to them, and then sometimes it comes up with a positive result. But it's, right now, they're just so afraid of being primary. This is the problem. Trump gets all his power, and that's actually a problem with our system as well as the problem with Donald Trump, because it should not be possible for someone like Donald Trump to have the power he does. And the reason that he has that power comes from one thing, which is these separate Republican partisan primaries. He gets all his power by threatening Republicans to put a well-funded primary challenger. And so but it's interesting, there are some states that do not have separate partisan primaries, like California has top two. Alaska, interestingly, has ranked choice. And they went to ranked choice for the simple reason of keeping Sarah Palin out of Congress. So what happened when they ran their ranked choice thing? Sarah Palin had a plurality, and in a normal system, she would be in Congress. But it turns out she was nobody's second choice. And when they reallocated the votes in the ranked choice system to include second place, she lost big. And we got a moderate Democrat, and since then we've gotten a moderate Republican. And so that this is a powerful force toward the center. And actually, even in California, where they have a simple top two, where the top two advance independent of the party, Donald Trump doesn't even try to play in California. Because if he endorses someone in California, that makes them less likely to win, even in a Republican district. So there's a motion in Illinois to start going over either to open primaries or to ranked choice primaries. Okay,
we're going to get back to a little wonky question. What is the next step in the budget process? And what are the Dems asking for?
Okay, all right, so as I said, there are two leverage points coming up on this. First off, we're not, the way the budget process works very roughly is that both the House and the Senate comes up with the allocations toward the big areas that we want to spend money, as well as the total amount. And so let's say we're going to spend this much on science, this much on Medicaid, this much on this or that. It's actually specified at the committee level. And so that, for example, in the case of Medicaid and science spending through the Department of Energy, it goes to a committee called the Energy and Commerce Committee. They are given one number. okay? And you probably have heard this $880 billion cut that they have to, and so that they said, here's our pot of money, we need to fund Medicare and Medicaid and, Department of Energy and everything else, okay? And the Doges or Trump or whoever has negotiated the budget says, let us cut, this committee has to cut $880 billion, okay? The problem is, the everything else that's not Medicare and Medicaid is not $880 billion. So they can eliminate the entire Department of Energy and all the other stuff that they do and still not be able to do this. They have to satisfy this edict, they have to cut. They have to cut probably Medicaid, all right? And so this is the lie they've been trapped in when they make one promise to one group and a different inconsistent promise to another group. And so what's happened as a result of that they passed something in the House over my dead body and the vote of every Democrat against it. And the Senate has also passed something, but they're not the same. Because there are things in the House budget that senators don't like and vice versa. The next step is for them to somehow come to an agreement. And they have to do that in a situation where they have no votes to spare, or 1 or 2 votes to spare. They've got at least one member who will never vote for anything. And Thomas Massey, he's an interesting guy. If you ever visit my office in DC, his office is across the hall from mine. Anyway, so that's the next step, is to see if the Republicans can stop arguing with each other between the House and the Senate and come up with a plan. And then it goes back to the committees, and they have to actually take this money for the Energy and Commerce Committee with the $880 billion cut and actually be specific about how much they're going to spend on everything. And that's when, that'll be ripping the clothes off of them on their lies to the people about not cutting Medicaid. And so and at that point, maybe they'll start getting cold feet, or maybe not. They'll just say, oh, we lied, so what? I don't know. But that's the next step. In between that, and so then when they get that figured out, they then have to pass it in both the House and the Senate. In the Senate, they can do it with 51 votes. They don't need to get past a filibuster. So that if they maintain unanimity on their desire to cut Medicaid and give their tax breaks to their billionaires, then we cannot stop them if they remain unanimous. And our goal is to try to we only need 3 in the House to come our way and say, no, I'm actually going to not lie to the people that elected me, and I'm not going to cut Medicaid. We'll see if that happens, but it's going to be.
Special elections coming up.
Well, yeah, they're important, but they're not seats that are likely to flip one way or the other. That's the case. They're still worth working on. And I want to say something. This is an official side thing, so this is not a political thing. I want to say something. A lot of people are saying, what can I do now that will actually make a difference and make my voices heard? Well, here's something concrete and immediate that can be done all across this country in the next few weeks. It's different states and areas. We're having municipal elections. And normally I think it's wonderful that municipal elections are nonpartisan, because most issues locally are nonpartisan. But this is not normal times. And now there is no excuse for anyone running for office to not have a position on what Donald Trump is trying to do to our democracy. So if you're running for Park District, you need to have a position on whether you should cut the So get involved in the upcoming elections that are coming up in just a couple of weeks here. Have a look at people's position. Are they willing to stand up and criticize Donald Trump's policies or not? Okay, and that should be, because if the municipal politicians that run for office and get clobbered because of Trump's policies and they lose the election, all the political pundits and all the pollsters will say, wow, this is a big effect. And that will put the fear of God into enough Republicans that maybe we can get 1 or 2 or 3 to start voting our way. And that's
Okay, well, that was going to be my closing question, but we'll have time for a couple more here. The financial aid crisis of homeless veterans is a problem. How do you propose a solution? And then the second question also talks about, a response to the issue of immigration. And so we can do homeless veterans and then pivot
Well,
to immigration question.
Yeah, one of the features about the Trump's firing of people is that for many years, and particularly in the Biden administration, we've had very strong hiring preferences for veterans, which is something that's great. I mean, veterans have put their life on the line. So for many years, we've had a policy that if two equally qualified candidates present themselves, one's a veteran, one's not, we'll give the job to the veteran. And I think I'm just fine with that. And it's been strengthened substantially in the Biden administration. And then now the Doges come in and they say, oh, we're going to fire everyone who's recently hired. Well, guess what? This is like tens of thousands of veterans that they are firing. And they have to have the answer for that. And that's part of it. The other part has to do with the housing crisis in this country. And, we just had a sort of a strategy meeting on financial services with Liz Warren and Maxine Waters and the whole, the leadership on both the Senate and House committees. And it's the banking committee, but it's also the housing committee. And so a lot of what we talked about was housing. And what can we do? The number one thing, well, there's two things. So what you'd like to do, and then what you think you can accomplish with Republicans in charge. And the thing we could maybe get accomplished is to increase the supply of housing. Because, there's sort of two ways to solve the problem. You can give money to people who are trying to rent or to buy a house, or you can give money to people who are trying to build a house. All right? And if you get people to build more houses because you're subsidizing them, you build a house that will be on the market forever and will drive down prices. And so, from an economics point of view, you can solve it either on the supply side or the demand side. The Republicans seem to be okay with solving on the supply side. And if that's what we can get, Liz Warren gave a really good speech on this. And then that is actually something that we should just be focusing on right now. And the problem is that what the Trump administration is doing with all these tariffs is going in the opposite direction. If you're a home builder, you don't like the idea that lumber prices are skyrocketing because we're tariffing Canadian lumber. Or if you have a lot of steel parts and the price of steel is skyrocketing because of tariffs. And this is, and just normal housing, doorknobs and stuff like that are imported from various countries. And when those prices go up by 30 or 50% because of tariffs, housing costs go up. And that's inevitable. And so he's actually moving in the opposite direction that we think we could get support by Republicans for to try to make the home builders more productive and build more homes. Anyway, so that's sort of the state of play there. There's something like 2 to 4 million missing homes in this country. And that's, that's a fact that we just have to fix.
And the second part of that was related to immigration and housing and the situation that we're seeing with the Trump administration and immigration. What is your position?
Well, again, it's this sort of this glee at human misery. I've been wrestling with all the 15 years that I've been in this crazy business. We came so close to passing comprehensive immigration reform back in 2013 when the Senate passed comprehensive immigration reform and the House. I was working with Luis Gutierrez, who was in the House at the time, and we were sort of tag teaming, trying to get Republicans to promise they would vote for it if we were allowed to vote for it, and we were never allowed to vote. So for something like a year and a half, this bill was passed by the Senate and waiting to be voted on. And had John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, just gotten up any day and listened to the Pope, who was not ambiguous about comprehensive immigration reform, and brought it up for a vote, it would have passed by 30 votes. And that the bargain that's in there is important to remember because that bargain is still there. All right, part of it comes to the recognition that we cannot open our borders. We just can't, because if we open our borders to anyone who wants to come the next day, half the population of the world will be here. So we need an orderly system to do that, and we need the rule of law. And so that's, you have to start by recognizing that, and then you have to start by saying, okay, we need reasonable quotas, because what doesn't work is if you have a lot more jobs for immigrants than you have slots in your immigration system, somebody's got to cheat, or you're going to have, or the economy won't work. And so you fix that, and was fixing this bill by realistic quotas. And then you get to the very important issue and very sensitive issue of people that have been here for a long time, decades, and have been contributing to the economy, but that they came here by breaking the rules, all right? And so and the deal that was in that bill, which I think is still available today, is that you pay back taxes if you haven't been paying taxes. You pay a fine for coming in here illegally. You are given a tough but fair path to citizenship, okay? And then that's it. You have real enforcement of E-Verify, so you can no longer just hire people who are not legal to work here. That's the other side of the coin to get Republicans to vote for it. It would be a return to the rule of law, okay, and a path to citizenship, and you'd have very strong background checks, because Democrats and Republicans agree that people with serious criminal histories should not be allowed to stay in the country. And what's interesting when we were explaining this is that, these 7 or so points that I just went over, the Republicans say the exact same thing, but they say them in different order. That when Republicans go through those 7 points, they start with all the hard-ass points. Rule of law, we can't have criminals in, all this sort of stuff. But at the end, they acknowledge that these are human beings that just want good lives for their children. Democrats do the opposite. We start with the acknowledgement of the humanity, and then we end, well, of course, we don't want criminals in our country. The exact same points in the opposite order, and for whatever reason, the American public, if you start with the hard-ass points and end with the soft ones, it's 40 points better in the approval.
Demonization works.
But if it gets you to the same point, if it gets you to the same policy, I'm bored. I will say them in imaginary numbers if that's what it takes to get this thing to pass. But I just want to give a little bit of hope, because there is, in a broad spectrum of the American public, an agreement that can get us out of this mess. And we just have to find out how to thread that needle.
Congressman, we have time for a couple more questions, and then we'll have to wrap it up for this evening. I do ask again if you could speak a little closer to that microphone.
Yeah, can those in the
that
back,
would be super
the back, you
helpful.
probably not I got a thumbs up. I feel better. Okay.
Yeah, we do have a number of questions related to Doge and Musk, and really a grave concern about his authority to fire people and his authority to see our private information. How is that being addressed?
Okay, 2 semi-separate issues. He has sent these computer whiz 23-year-old kids into every single one of the offices. We have, frankly, I regard myself as a pretty accomplished computer programmer. And when I look at the computer systems of the federal government, they're not great, because they've been underfunded for a long, long time. And so what he's done is just sent these people in to just rip the data out of those systems, and then he's going to have access to all every one of us who's had any financial interaction with the government. The data is sucked into those systems, and then you have a tremendous potential invasion of privacy. And Congress has passed, one of the reasons why the systems are so clunky is that Congress has passed many restrictions on what the government can and cannot do with your money. For example, the IRS, before, in the pre-Doge times, the IRS could almost never share data with other sections of the government, partly because some members of Congress, maybe they have a lot of voters who are like minor tax cheats or major tax cheats, and they don't want to get caught. But so that there are lots of restrictions, and those are all just being thrown out the window, by the Doges, who just said, we want all the data. And so there's a huge potential problem. There's also the problem that the firewalls that normally separate the government data from whatever it is Musk wants to do. I mentioned that protest I was at outside Treasury when all this stuff started. And at the time they said, don't worry, they have only read-only access and it's all anonymized and all this sort of thing. It's a complete lie, okay? And in fact, they were given root access, administrator access to these systems, which means they could pull down firewalls and exfiltrate the data. They could just install arbitrary software. And we were just directly lied to about the situation there. And that made a lot of Republicans unhappy as well as Democrats, and they stayed quiet. We did not. But this is something where I think there can be common ground, is just providing stronger safeguards against unelected third parties like the Doges coming in And, if you want to have access to the IRS data, you have to have like months of training on safety and data safety and data privacy to even get permission to access this stuff. And they just bypassed that because Trump told them they could.
What about
What are you doing about it?
Yeah. What, the civil lawsuits? I'm not a lawyer. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. There are a bunch of really smart lawyers that are doing.
But isn't it against the law for them, for those to do what they're doing?
Yes. And your point is what?
The point is this, is that what can be done with this administration that is truly violating the law?
Yes.
Okay.
What can be
So
done?
what happened? The system as it exists, you have a third party go to the court. Congress can't initiate the suit when they're violating the law, as I said. You have a third party, of which there are lots with good standing, to go and file a specific suit. And you pick a lower court somewhere, and then they make a decision, and whoever loses, appeals up, and it lands in the Supreme Court, and that isn't instantaneous. So we're sort of a third of the way through that procedure. And as I say, we have not lost on the merits at all. All right, so there's a hope that eventually it's going to. Anyway, that's.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It'd be better if we don't have people calling out from the audience at this point. We've been doing great tonight, and we really appreciate your patience. Certainly, we're happy to answer further questions, and we'd be happy to set up those virtual office hours to further discuss your concerns. We did get a really, kind of to finish out this evening, a question. Dear sir, why did you choose to be a Democrat? That was one submitted tonight, so I thought that would be a good one to finish up.
That's, it comes down to my dad. My dad and my parents both. Well, I'll give you a hint. My sister's middle name is Adlai. But my parents met on Capitol Hill when Mom worked for Senator Paul Douglas of Illinois. And I actually, so I grew up listening to stories about Paul Douglas and Lyndon Baines Johnson locking horns in the Senate and all these, what the Senate was like in the 1950s when my parents met. The way it worked is that my mom worked for Senator Paul Douglas, Dad worked for a different senator, and so he delivered some papers to her office and then started making up reasons why he had to deliver more papers to their office. And then he discovered that she was on the same bus that he took back to Georgetown, which was a cheap place to live back then. And so that he would accidentally on purpose take the same bus, sort of wait around until she got on the bus and ask her out for a date. And according to my mom, the point at which she finally realized that she loved this guy was when he took her out traipsing around in one of the Civil War battlefields, and they were out in the drizzle. And they're out in the drizzle, and Dad had this book, on 315, General so-and-so ordered his team to take this ridge, but they were driven back and all. And Mom was sitting up, why am I out in the drizzle? Let's see this guy. I must love him a lot. And both of them, for years and years when I was growing up, we grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. And at the time, Madison, believe it or not, was a very Republican city. All right, and so what the claim is, when I was a toddler, I knew the names of all of the members of the Democratic Party of Madison, Wisconsin, all 15 of them. And so I, then I went off to science, and I went up to science and spent my career not thinking about this. I had a business career, which was great, and a science career. But there was a moment when it was when my father died. And those of you who've had a parent die, you sort of go through their papers and you read through them and you say, who's ever going to be interested in this again? And you sort through the boxes and stuff. And so I encountered a set of letters that my father was sending to his parents when he was talking about leaving science. My dad was a scientist, and during World War II, he designed fire-controlled computers for the Navy. And most of the way through the war, starting these reports of how many people were killed by his team's equipment each week, and became very unhappy with his scientific skills being used to kill people. And so he had grown up in the South, and he did not like a lot of what he saw about how blacks were being treated there. And so he saw civil rights as the great moral challenge of his generation. And so he left science to become a civil rights lawyer. And as I said, ended up writing the enforcement language behind the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so that's, you know, reading that's sort of the core of it. You know, this question of what fraction of your life you spend in service to your fellow man. And because, you know, when, you know, I had a great time in science and a great time in business, but there's still this feeling that you should do more to give back to your fellow man. And that's what makes me.
Thank you.